Hey everyone, I'm pro photographer Ian Plant, your host of PhotoMasters. And in this video, I interview pro photographer Ben Williamson. He is based in Maine and he specializes in photographs of New England. And in this video, Ben and I talk a lot about the art and craft of photography. So if you want to learn more, then stay tuned. Hey, Ben, welcome to PhoneMasters. So glad to have you on.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Fantastic. Well, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself? In 2 minutes or less, give us your origin story as a photographer.
I live in Maine and really got into photography late in life after what I'd describe as a failed music career. Was really working hard, wanted to be a professional musician. And it just wasn't happening in Maine. I feel like I would have had to move to a big city like New York or Los Angeles or Nashville or Austin. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to stay here and loved Maine and living in Maine. So when I gave up on this music dream, that energy had to go somewhere. And I can see now that, it went right into photography. I started taking a camera out with me on walks around my house. I live in a beautiful area with beaches nearby and lighthouses and lobster boats and a really unique, interesting culture that's combined with the beautiful landscape. And I wanted to capture those things that I was seeing and just became really obsessed with putting four corners around the world, around everything that was in front of me and kind of telling stories with photos, but also just being really excited about compositional ideas and building images using all the visual language, which at first didn't have a very good grasp of, but kind of built up over time and really enjoyed that learning process too. Feel like when you're on the edge of learning a new skill and things are really difficult, and the challenge is there, it's really fun. So fast forward 2 years and I was the photo editor at Down East Magazine, which is a large regional publication, and was putting all the images that go into Down East by, looking online for other photographers who had made images or sending people out into the field, kind of making assignments for photography, as well as doing a lot of my own work. And at the same time, started leading photography workshops, both privately with a partner named Michael Blanchett and through the magazine later, built up a whole photography workshop program through Down East. So that's been, really, it was a fast learning curve and went really quickly from being a total novice to a professional. And it's been a blast. And for the last few years, I've been actually striking out on my own and working with Kurt Budliger, who you know, and some other wonderful photographers in our area, John Putnam, Daryl Ann Leonard, leading photography workshops. And I actually have a thriving print business where I sell prints both through my website, but also a lot in local stores in the area up and down the coast of Maine. A lot of matted 8x10s, which I'm kind of putting together back here in the background. And it's been really good.
Well, that's fantastic. And I definitely have a lot of questions about your photography, and I want to keep the conversation focused on your photography, but I am now obsessed with the fact that you used to be a musician. So maybe very quickly we could go off the rails and talk a little bit about that. So what instrument did you play? Were you a singer? What kind of music did you do? I want to know everything.
Like most people, play guitar and did a little bit of singing. Not the greatest voice. I think that was kind of hindering my career, to be honest. But pretty good guitar player, and was really mostly excited about making up my own songs and playing original material. I see how that's kind of carried into photography too. I really enjoy the creative process. Much would rather play my own songs than to play a cover. And I played in a band called Repeat Offenders from I think about 2006 to 2009 with some local guys. We had a lot of fun, toured around New England, recorded an album actually through a small record label put out a CD, and just did the musician thing for quite a while. Played in a bunch of bars, had people acting really rowdy. I think I might have taken my shirt off a few times.
Well, I'm having a hard time picturing that. Little known fun fact about myself, I actually used to be a musician myself, or I should say a wannabe musician. I was young at the time, kind of in high school, beginning of college. I was in a heavy metal band, and I played bass, the electric bass guitar. They called me Ian Power Plant, and I was awful. I mean, I was just terrible. I was a bass player. My job was to help keep the rhythm, but I couldn't even do that. Like, I was always off the beat or whatever. And so I was awful as a musician. I was awful with every type of art I've ever tried in my life. I can't paint, I can't draw, but I can press a button on a camera. And so for me personally, taking up photography was the only time that art ever made sense to me. Like, everything else I tried, any other artistic endeavor, I fell completely flat. But with photography, I had some unique skill that's relevant to that type of art that allowed me to pursue that passion and not feel like I was making a mess out of it like I had with everything else. And so, do you feel that your artistic skills as a photographer are somehow different than the artistic skills you developed as a musician, or is there some crossover there?
I can so relate to what you're saying. I'm like so glad that I found photography, because I'm such a better photographer than I ever was musician. And, I wasn't the worst musician the whole time, and I could keep in the rhythm, but I was actually listening to some of my music today because we're moving, and I cleaned out the house and found these old recordings that I'd made. I was listening to it, and a lot of it's like, oh, what were you thinking, buddy? That's not very good, As far as crossover skills, I think it's been talked about before. A lot of photographers were former musicians, like people like Tony Sweet, and Nick Page was a drummer. Sorry about that. And Ansel Adams, famously, piano player. I think that the urge to be creative connects us. I think that using parts of your brain associated with creativity and problem solving and storytelling and language, I think the language of music and the language of photography are actually surprisingly connected in the way that visual elements of design and color can often be like a symphony or a melody. I do think there is a relationship there between music and photography, at least and all visual arts for that matter, as far as the way that we interpret the world around us.
Well, you use this word connect a lot, and I'm just going to read to you a quote from your website. I want to connect. That's my number one goal when I'm out with my camera. I want to be totally engrossed, enamored, and maybe even enraptured with what is in front of me. If I'm successful at this, I think you will connect too. So let's unpack this a little bit. So what is it that you mean by this quote, and how does that factor into your photography? What is it you're looking to do artistically to connect?
It's being present. It's being in the moment and freeing myself of distractions and being in a situation that my interests are fully engaged. My passion for weather helps me connect with landscape photography big time. My passion for history helps me connect. It means the way that we can be just drawn in by what's in front of us and attracted to. In Western culture, we often say that we like something. I've heard that in other cultures, they say that something likes us. I think there's both of that. I think that things do draw us in, and it's so cool to see what people are attracted to or want to photograph, and what, as Brooke Shenson says, chooses your jets and gets you out there with the camera.
Okay, so, I guess I'm trying to identify some concrete things that you're looking for artistically when you're making photos. And so you've talked about looking for something that's unique, creating your own composition, not just shooting something that other people are doing. And you've mentioned weather, and you've also mentioned the uniqueness of the local area, whether it be culture or, some other aspect of the local area. And, I think all of these things are very important. And, especially this idea of local character. I'm often telling people that if you really want to reveal the essence of your subject, whether it's a landscape subject or, a travel subject or wildlife, you need to learn about what makes it different, what makes it unique. And then you try to showcase those unique features in the final photos. And so you are taking a regional approach, which is something that used to be much more common with photography. I remember before I started 20 years ago, most photographers were regional. You didn't have a lot of international photographers out there. And nowadays it's kind of flipped. In the age of Instagram, you got people traveling all over the world constantly taking photos in, the most extreme, far-flung places you can imagine. And you've kind of done that more traditional regional approach. And so I'm interested how you feel that regional approach makes your work different and why maybe that makes your work special.
It definitely grounds me in an area. We have a local artistic icon in Maine named Andrew Wyeth, who is a great painter. And his advice to young artists was to go deep, not wide or not broad. And I think that's what you're able to do when you really plug into an area. And I'm sure you can do that if you travel to the same area over and over, but I don't think you can if you just visit one area for a week. And I hate saying that because people come out with me on workshops and want to, really make amazing images after never visiting before and just being with me for a few days. And yes, you can do that. You can get lucky, but I think over time you build up these relationships, you gain a deeper understanding of the culture, and you're able to return to locations when the weather is better, when there are local events happening. All kinds of different factors come into play that allow that local photographer to get out and take advantage of just the best conditions, honestly.
Yeah, I like this idea of going deep. And I admit this is kind of a pet peeve of mine. The clients that we're often working with, leading photo workshops, typically they want to go and they want to hit all the highlights. And so if they're planning an itinerary on their own, if they're looking for advice, they're like, well, what should I do? And I'm usually telling them, well, go to one place and stay there for 2 weeks. And they look at me like I'm crazy because they're like, well, I want to go to Arches National Park and I want to visit all of these arches. And then I want to go to Canyonlands and then I want to go, this and that. And I try to tell them, like, well, if you do that over a 1 week or a 2 week trip, your chances of getting good photos drop dramatically. You might be seeing a lot, but you're not going to be getting that intimate connection with things. You're not going to be getting into the rhythm of a place. You're not going to be learning about the subject. And, your focus instead should be on making great photos. It shouldn't be on having this broad experience. It should instead be on having this deep experience where you go deep and try to make the very best photo that you can. And so I feel like more often than not, this advice gets ignored. So, another piece of advice I give people is to figure out a place locally where you can shoot. Even if it's not exactly the kind of thing you like shooting, having some local go-to spots can be really rewarding because, those are the places that are there. They're available. You get to know them. You get to discover all the secret places, and you can go out when the conditions are conducive to making great photographs. So I think these are really critical things to making great photos. And I see this so much in your work. So I'd like to actually discuss a few of your images, some of your images that really caught my eye that are my personal favorites. So let's start off with this one. So, I love this photo. There's just so much about it that's incredible. And I think maybe I'll offer my thoughts on it after you've had a chance to explain what this is and how you made this photo. So just kind of walk us through the creative process of creating this image.
This was over in New Hampshire during peak fall foliage a couple of years ago. And this is a place that has been photographed, and I'd seen photos very similar to this with the white church against this beautiful hillside with colorful leaves. But on this day, we had a nice strong breeze, and this breeze was picking up these seed pods in the field, which you can see some in the foreground there, and blowing them into the air. So we waited around for a good hour or so until the wind picked up more and more of these seed pods into the air, and wanted to take the image when the air was just full of these. So I was photographing in burst mode and trying to look for that moment when the frame was just kind of filled with the seed pods in the air against that beautiful background.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, this is definitely an iconic image, like the New England church with the fall color. I've certainly seen a gazillion photos of that theme, not necessarily this particular subject, but something very similar. But this is the one that stands out the most to me. And it's a combination of the low perspective you have. So you're bringing in I guess this is maybe a farm field or something like that in the foreground. And so you're bringing that out of focus element that's creating some depth. And then you've got the out of focus seed pods. I actually thought it was maybe drifting snow, but either way, it just gives the photo not only some depth, but it enhances the visual interest. It just gives it this magical look. And so I look at this as being just an incredibly successful photo, the kind of photo that you could make just about anywhere, of any subject. But, it's the approach really that makes this stand out more than anything, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's another one that I'm not sure what's going on here. I've got a guess. But this looks like a really unusual moment that you've captured here. So I'm going to hazard a guess, and I'm going to say that this is some bioluminescence that's washing up on the shore here.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yep. And totally unexpected. So this is about 4 a.m. in May on the coast of Maine. And I was out, in the spring, the core of the Milky Way comes up at this latitude, and the hardcore night photographers in New England all go out to capture it. And I'm not a hardcore night photographer myself, but I do love being out at night. And this was kind of at the time when digital cameras were really starting to be able to capture the night sky with detail like this. And I wanted to give my try at it, capturing the Milky Way. I had no idea that I would find bioluminescence in the water. And as I sat there with the tripod trying to get some of these rocks in my foreground, I looked down, and it looked like, at first, I thought I was seeing reflected starlight. But then I took a long exposure with the camera, about 25 seconds, and I looked at the LCD, and it was blue. And I was like, oh, cool. This really is like bioluminescence in the water. And the way that it mirrors the stars in the sky, which I actually thought it was, the reflection of the stars in the sky, just made this such a meaningful experience, first of all. And then a really cool photo that has some technical issues that prevent me from printing it really big. But I think just the fact that I captured it and the story that it conveys is still pretty awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's very unique, and it's totally unexpected. When I think of bioluminescence, I don't think of the coast of Maine. And so,
no.
On one hand, this was very lucky that this happened. On the other hand, that's what photography is all about, in a way. I mean, as photographers, we're out there hoping to capture luck. We're waiting for these unique moments that are photogenic. And part of the way that you get lucky is by putting yourself in an opportunity to get lucky. So being out there doing photography as much as you can is the best way to get lucky, I think. It's just a matter of time before luck favors you. Though it seems to me that the luck I typically have is bad luck, more so than good luck.
That's funny, that too. We don't show people those photos.
Right. So you mentioned earlier the importance of weather. And to me, the weather is the story in this photo. And when I first saw this photo, I just fell in love with it right away because it tells a very effective story. And when I think of New England, when I think of Maine, I don't know, maybe Hollywood has affected my view. I think of the perfect storm, and this image really captures that. It just, this is the sort of stormy Atlantic weather that that I always kind of expect to see when I'm visiting Maine. And so I just love everything about this image.
Yeah, thanks. This is actually, I tell people in the summer, a lot of people come here and they have lobster rolls out on a deck at this restaurant. This is actually a restaurant that's kind of in the mist behind the lobster wharf there. And you can sit out on a sunny day and have a lobster roll and just enjoy the boats passing by, beautiful, beautiful scenery. But I'm like, I don't think many people were out having a lobster roll on the day that I took this. It was about maybe 5 degrees and 40-mile-an-hour winds. It hurt to stand outside and to make. I didn't actually. I took this photo from inside a car on a bridge looking over this thing. Little known fact. And yeah, I love being out in really, really bad weather. We've had some tremendous storms in Maine over the past few years, and I'm out for every single one, every time.
Well, I love how weather can transform a scene. I mean, I think that on a clear, sunny, calm day, this composition would not be anywhere near as interesting. It would not be something that I think most people would think to photograph. But under the right conditions, it produces a beautiful photo. And I love making images like that. It just, those to me are the images that other people can't easily recreate or copy. So this image is beguiling. Tell us a little bit about what's going on here and how you made this photo.
This is the alewife migration in Maine. Every spring, usually the first week or two in May, these fish come from the ocean and come up the rivers to spawn. And in great, great numbers, as you can see here. And they're very, very similar looking fish at first glance, but I like this perspective because I was standing on a bridge pointed straight down. I made sure that what I was photographing was in the shade. I was using a circular polarizing filter to cut any reflections and just pointed straight down into the water. And these fish that look very similar under most conditions kind of take on these different hues, different colors. I did boost the contrast quite a bit, lowered the black point. Didn't do anything with the color because, when you boost contrast, the color just comes right out. And I just love the flow of this image. You can tell the fish are swimming upstream. And I did make sure that I compose the images so that the fish are moving from right to left, which is kind of in Western culture, we're reading it against the current, which is what they were doing, swimming upstream. And it's definitely one of my favorite images I've ever captured. Very different from a lot of more traditional landscapes that I photograph.
Well, I find this image inspiring. Now I'm thinking of planning a trip to Maine just to capture this. But what I want to do is I've got an underwater drone that I haven't really had an opportunity to do much photography with yet. And so I think that might be kind of perfect for capturing a unique angle of this event.
Yeah, it's really cool. And a lot of wildlife photographers come out for this too, because osprey are hitting the water and pulling these guys out all over the place. And it's super dramatic bird photography. And the eagles are swooping in and, scaring the osprey into dropping their fish and stealing them. It's really cool.
All right. It's a date. I'll be there in early May.
It's a really neat event.
So obviously you've got a lot of lighthouses in Maine, and some of them are very photogenic. But once again, I can see how weather is playing such a big role in your photography here. And waiting for the moments where you've got these, for lack of a better way of putting it, perfect storm that comes in that just really complements your subject. These are the images that I love the most.
So I sent you probably 30 photos. And I think out of those 30 photos, maybe 10 of them were of this lighthouse. Yeah. This is Portland Headlight, south of Portland, Maine. It's unbelievably photogenic. There are views from many angles of this beautiful structure over these incredible rocky headlands. So whenever dramatic weather or anything interesting in the sky or in the ocean is happening at all, this is where I want to be, because it's just such a great location. And I've returned again and again. Our friend Kurt likes to joke that I've made a whole career out of photographing one location, Portland Headlight. And maybe a little bit of that's true. At least for, I noticed that people outside of Maine will recognize this and be like, oh, yeah, that's an awesome spot. Like it really is. So this
Well,
wave was December 23rd, 2022, right before Christmas. And this actual wave, and I know because I did a burst shoot and I got to see the damage afterwards. It actually knocked out a door, it knocked out a window, it knocked this granite pillar holding up a bell off its foundation. It ripped up a slate rock way. It was just an incredibly powerful wave and did a lot of damage. And I was there and captured it.
well, let's talk about that for a moment because working on the coast can be dangerous. It's a dynamic coastal environment. In Maine, you've got a lot of rocky coast, which usually magnifies the force of the waves coming in. And, I've done a lot of coastal photography, and I've certainly had some encounters with the water that have been, shall we say, exceptionally terrifying. And, it's really easy to make a mistake when you're working in a dynamic environment. A lot of times you want to be near the water or even in the water. So what do you do to stay safe when you're making photos like this? And have you ever had any terrifying encounters with the water yourself?
I stay very, very safe, and I don't mess around with water. I know what it can do. I've seen it too many times, not with myself, but with other photographers who get into bad situations too close to the water. And not not only do you have the risk of losing your life, but you have the risk of losing your camera, which is absolutely terrible, right? I've definitely seen people lose their cameras in salty seawater, and I'm like, that's never coming back. You're
Yeah.
not saving that camera, no matter how many rice bags you put it in. But I don't mess around. For that photo, I was standing behind a fence, and it looks like I'm dramatically right close to where the wave is, but I'm pretty far back and at a safe distance, zooming in a little bit with a little bit of a longer lens. But I did get completely drenched from head to toe, and a lot of the sea spray, not the force of the waves, but the sea spray in the air just completely drenched me. Every time a wave would come in, would be absolutely soaked. But I stay away from the water's edge and getting right in the waves because it is too dangerous. I've got 3 little kids and a wife who cares about me, and intend on living as long as I can without, my death being a result of my own stupidity.
Well, I think that's a pretty good policy, regardless of your family situation. And I tell people that if you are working on the coast, that even before, ever before thinking of approaching the water, you should sit there and watch the waves crash on the shore for several minutes. So you have an idea of where they're crashing. You have an idea of how the waves might be shifting a bit in the weather. And you also will have a chance to see any rogue waves because these rogue waves tend to come every few minutes, the bigger waves than normal. And so I always, if it's really windy and there's lots of dangerous wave action, I will sit there for 5 minutes just watching the waves crash on the shore before making a closer approach so that I know I'm not going into an area that's dangerous. But even then, you got to keep an eye out on things. Never turn your back on the sea because the wave action might change if the wind or the tides change. And sometimes it's just something random will happen. The whole rogue wave thing. Sometimes there's waves that are more roguish than others. And so I always keep an eye on the waves, but at the very least, I always keep an ear on them. You can sometimes hear it when something big is about to approach. Either there's this really dramatic backswell as, the water rushes out, that might foreshadow a bigger wave coming in, or if a big wave is coming in, you can often just hear it. It sounds different. And so I keep an eye and an ear out for any incoming waves that could be dangerous. And I always have like a clear exit path. So I'm always looking for a way to get out of someplace really quickly if a big wave comes in. So if I see it coming in, I grab my gear and I run. I think discretion is the better part of valor. And when it comes to ocean photography, cowardice is the better part of discretion. So I go straight to cowardice and run away whenever I have to.
As you should. I never saw a photo from someone who was in the middle of a wave that was a good photo. I've seen plenty of like photographers say, look at this, like, and they show you this image of the tilted camera angle and the water droplets on the lens and kind of water spray in the air, and like, I almost died. I'm like, you almost died for that? Why would you even? Versus like, cool, like, we do know that getting in the water and close when you have long exposure, you can see the kind of streaky waves in your foreground, make a nice leading line and stuff. That's cool. But you don't, when the waves are big and forceful and dangerous, that doesn't even work as well. I'm not going to do a long exposure of this wave hitting the lighthouse. I want to freeze it at, I think, like 1/2000th of a second for this photo, and really show you the power and intensity of the wave. With the smaller waves and when I'm in the water on the shoreline, that's totally fine to do those longer exposures. But for the big, gnarly, intense waves, I want to freeze the shutter and really stand at a distance and zoom in.
So, speaking of danger, here's a photo of some lightning, which this is an absolutely stunning photo. So, I'd love to learn more about this.
I was in the trunk of my car in a hatchback Honda CRV with the tripod set up inside the car, hatchback open, mostly to protect me from rain, but also from lightning. But I always tell people, especially showing this photo, is that lightning looks a lot better from a distance. When it's on top of you, usually you're inside of precipitation. There's rain obscuring the bolt and the structure of the lightning, or you just see this like white line in your frame because you're just seeing part of the lightning bolt. You're seeing the very bottom of it, versus if you're at a distance. In this case, I was probably 10, 20 miles away from the lightning, and I can see the entire cloud to ground structure of the lightning bolt. So it's much more photogenic at a distance, and it's also a lot safer.
Now, this looks to me like it's a fairly extreme telephoto perspective. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is probably 150 millimeters.
Okay, so that's not too extreme.
Not too bad. I'm in the trunk of my car, and the storm's approaching, and I'm just pointing the camera in the direction of the last strike I've seen. At this point, I was actually thinking that I might have already captured something I was happy with, and I was about to call it a day. But I love seeing these storms come in. I was like, all right, just one more photograph. And I'm doing long exposures, one after the other, not using a lightning trigger of any kind. And I like the long exposures because I'm able to capture a lot of the ambient light too with those 20, 30-second exposures. And I love photographing lightning at twilight, so that I can get a little bit of the cool tones in the sky, a little bit more contrast, and then that ambient light kind of filling in the scene, showing what's happening on the island there.
Yeah, I mean, I love the color palette of this. I think it's those rich twilight blues combined with the bright white of the lightning bolt. That's a really nice color palette. So, stunning image, and I'm glad to hear that you did not.
Yeah, and it just struck right between those islands. It was crazy.
Yeah. It's a really nice, it's a really graphic image. It almost looks like a painting or something like that. And I'm glad to hear that you neither got struck by lightning nor washed away by a rogue wave making this image. So this photo caught my eye because of the colors and the texture, but it's also one of the funniest of your photos. So I love the name of the boat, the Lucky Catch, juxtaposed against what's clearly a very, very lucky catch with the sky. So it's not often that you see this sort of mammatus cloud formation, and having those beautiful like upside down bubble clouds catching the light of sunrise or sunset, just those colors. This really is in fact a lucky catch.
It really is. And I'd been photographing this sunrise actually. And I was photographing into the light because I love backlight and all the drama. But not until I moved around did I find the Lucky Catch boat with the bow line pointing right into the scene. But also the side light against the Mammatus was way more interesting than the complete backlit scene that had been photographing earlier. So I was very lucky, and I love Mammatus clouds. I love big thunderstorms. I really want to go storm chasing on the Great Plains in early May, or even here there's kind of a second season in September. And I just want to photograph storms from a distance and see the cloud structures. And it's very rare to have clouds like this in Maine. I just got really lucky for this occasion.
Well, let me know when you want to come out and do it. I mean, I've done a lot of storm photography in the Badlands in South Dakota, but I've been thinking about, working in Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, farther to the south, just storm chasing. In the Badlands, you just sort of sit there and wait for the storms to hit you. But I would love to go storm chasing. So let me know, and I'll come out in May to photograph those fish, and then you can come out during the summer, and we'll do some storm chasing.
Let's do it. I'm so into it.
Fantastic. This photo really caught my eye, mainly because this is the kind of scene that is subtle. And, I think that anyone who's worked in some of these areas of the world that are often considered less iconic in terms of landscape photography, so if you're working in the Northeast or the Midwest, other parts of the country or the world that don't have the big, tall, dramatic mountains or the thundering waterfalls. A lot of serious landscape photographers just go for the big scenery, the big desert formations, the giant mountains of California or Alaska, or other places around the world. And they often ignore these more subtle landscapes. And I think it's a huge mistake for them, because I think that working these more subtle landscapes forces you to be more creative with composition and with the use of light and weather. And you're waiting for those moments when these very subtle scenes are transformed by the combination of light and weather. And, I look at something like this. This is just your typical New England pond in autumn. Not, an ugly scene. It's pretty, but without the weather, without the fog on the water and the fog catching the light up above, it's probably a little more ho-hum. And I think that the weather and the light really transforms this into something that's unique and magical.
Yeah, this is a fantastic location. Honestly, anytime. This is in Kurt Budliger's backyard, basically, in Vermont. And we always go to this location on our fall foliage photography workshops in Vermont. In fact, this year we went twice to this location because it faces east at sunrise. And in the fall, it's pretty much guaranteed that one of the mornings you will have mist rising off the water. It's shedding the heat of summer, and you get a cold morning, and there's going to be steam and foggy mist. This being down on the swamps in Louisiana. The water is relatively warm and the air is cool, and you get that beautiful autumn mist coming out the water. So this is definitely, I totally agree with you on photographing in New England and places that are a little bit quieter, a little more subtle, that you kind of have to work harder. You have to hone your skills, with the result being that you make more interesting, intimate, meaningful, emotive imagery that I think will be communicated. We can all look at a photo of a grand landscape, a beautiful snowy mountain peak and reflections on water, and it'll hold our attention for maybe a second or two, and then we scroll on. Like, yep, seen that. That's really cool. Versus something like this, I hope that it holds your attention for longer than a second or two, and that you really kind of look through the image and your eye moves around and you consider more than just the initial appearance of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some truth to that. I know a lot of photographers that just shoot the big, majestic icons. And, a lot of those images can be very creative and they can be very skilled with composition and the use of light. But I feel like with those types of photos, the landscape scenery itself is doing most of the work. And when you're working these more subtle landscapes, you as the artist have to be more involved in the creative process. So you're doing more of the work. You're doing the heavy lifting. And, you're just waiting for those those perfect moments that come together, that perfect luck that is the core of photography. And then you pounce when you get it. And I've always felt that does sharpen your skills. And so that when you're out there photographing those dramatic landscapes, you're relying less on the natural beauty of the scenery and more on your own personal creative process, or at least that's always been my opinion.
Yeah, I was going to say, you and I have both done both of those things. We've gone to the iconic locations at plenty, and I love those. I love seeing them with my own eyes. But your skill as a photographer, I think, results from exploration and discovery. I think that's such a huge part of what drives me in photography. I think same for you, is how do you solve this puzzle? How do you make things make sense in the four corners of the frame visually in an interesting way and in a way that is meaningful to your own creativity and your own approach, your own life experiences, your own background?
Yeah, and what you just said about discovery, I feel like that is of utmost importance, especially when you're working your local area, working with those more subtle landscapes, is looking around the nooks and crannies, what Kurt Budliger would call the English muffin approach. So, the magic of the English muffin is when you put the butter over the hot muffin and the butter soaks into the nooks and crannies, that's when it really begins to taste good. And so I see a lot of that in your work where you're just exploring, finding those nooks and crannies. And this image is a perfect example of that. This is, I'm guessing this is some sea cave you discovered somewhere along the coast of Maine. And you recognized its potential and made a great photo of it.
Top secret sea cave. Only the people in the know about the sea cave. No, I'm sure there are other places on the coast of Maine where I could photograph something similar. But this one, I'd seen photographs of this, but only of the main opening of the sea cave. I'd never seen anyone capture the reflection. Most people are doing the horizontal framing. So to capture the reflection, I actually had to have my 12 millimeter Sony 12 to 24 lens, put that vertical and capture the reflection of the opening in the sea cave as well as the opening, and made a unique image. And yes, all about getting in there in that nook and cranny, literally, and trying to see how I could see it in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, it's a kind of a, in many ways, this is very unique because it's not something that's photographed a lot. And, you did it in a way that was different from the few people who were photographing it. And I find that these images really tell a story, and they really transcend the place that you're photographing. Like people could look at this and they might imagine it's in a lot of different places around the world. I'm guessing if they didn't know where it was taken, the Maine coast probably wouldn't be high on their list. They'd probably be thinking about, oh yeah, this has got to be somewhere in Olympic National Park or some other dramatic coastal scenery that they're thinking of. And they'd probably be pretty surprised to learn it was from down home Maine. And so I think that makes it, really stand out. Love the shape here. I love the colors. Love everything about it. And here's one more image that I wanted to talk about. So back to that very famous lighthouse that you've built your entire career on. No, I'm just kidding. Kurt's only mocking you because he's jealous. And I, in fact, am very jealous of this image. I mean, it's just so unique. The color palette is amazing, but I love the frost that you've got on the foreground foliage there. So, whatever this bush is, would not be a very interesting bush most of the time. It's probably the type of thing you would keep out of the photo. But this rare combination of light and weather transforms that into something incredibly photogenic.
So I'm excited to talk about this because the background of this image, I think, will be very empowering to beginning photographers and anyone who feels like they need the latest and greatest professional equipment to go out and make these types of photos. I took this with a Canon Rebel T2i and the kit lens that it came with, an 18 to 55, f4.5 to 5.6 lens. And I had that set up for the first 2 years of making photos and used the heck out of it and loved being out there in the field, of course, I felt jealous of the people who had better gear than me and had a wide angle lens and a telephoto lens. But I mean, that 18 to 55 on a crop sensor body and not knocking the Canon Rebel, that's a pretty good camera. It still is. When I have people come on workshops who have the Rebel, I'm like, oh yeah, I love this camera. I took a bunch of photos with the Canon Rebel. So this was like a career defining image for me. I took it in 2012 when I was just getting started and got really lucky with those conditions. There had been a big winter storm the previous day or two, and all this wave action created frozen sea spray in the bushes in the foreground. And we had this colossal sunrise that was casting this beautiful, truly magenta light on everything. And I later found out that our friend Colleen Minnick was actually on Ocean Drive the same morning photographing frozen bushes herself. And it was in her book, Guide to Acadia. I'm like, Colleen, that was after Winter Storm Nemo. And she was like, yes, you know. I'm like, I was out at Portland Headlight right down the coast from you. We had no idea. Didn't meet her for another 4 or 5 years. But we were both out there that morning capturing the same light and photographing frozen bushes. I thought that was so cool.
Well, you know, as it turns out, Colleen and I were in Ann Arbor at the same time. She was an undergraduate in the business school at the University of Michigan. I was in the law school at that time, but this was, you know, long before we met each other. And so I've got a feeling that there's probably a lot of people who have got these Colleen stories. She's kind of like Where's Waldo? She just pops up everywhere, but you just don't know that she's there until someone points it out.
I was born there in 1983.
Oh, really?
At the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor.
You were born at the University of Michigan?
I was.
Wow. In the hospital there?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Just a little bit before your time, Ian.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, it's okay. Yeah, 1983. That you're not that much younger than I am, but that was in fact before I was there going to law school. So.
Yeah, that's so funny. Elaine's awesome.
Yeah, she's a lot of fun. Well, I like what you said about how that photo was taken with an older camera that most people would consider to be less good. And I actually think that's a really good point, because it seems to me that these days there's lots of people looking for the latest photography hack. You know, like if you go on YouTube, it's a bunch of videos about pieces of equipment or about some processing tip, or, you know, do this one thing and it'll transform your photos. And it seems to me that a lot of it's just noise, that none of this is actually going to make your photography better. That what makes your photography better is actually learning how to take better photos, actually taking the time to learn composition, to learn how light works and how it interacts with your camera, to learn color theory, to learn the artistic basics. That is the most important thing. If you are a good artist, if you're a good photographer, then you can make great photos, even if you are working with older equipment or less expensive equipment. And even if you don't know all these amazing Photoshop hacks that everyone's obsessed about. And so I try to convey that to people all the time, that it's not where you go, it's not what you use, it's how you use it. It's how you approach a subject. And you can make amazing photos whether you travel to the most exotic places on earth, or whether you're working closer to home or working in an environment that other photographers might consider to be too subtle, not iconic enough. And so that's what I love about your work, is that you're focusing on this New England environment. You're going to other places, but you're working that local area. It's an area that I think often gets overlooked by a lot of serious photographers. And I think that's to their detriment, because I think there's a lot of amazing opportunities, and your work is proof that you can make amazing photos anywhere as long as you focus on just perfecting the art of photography. So Ben, thank you so much for coming on. There's a lot to learn, a lot to unpack here. I definitely recommend everyone check out Ben's website to see more of his work, and consider going on a workshop with him. I'll recommend going on a workshop that features both Ben and Kurtz, because I think that is something that everyone should experience. The two of them working together is a great time had by all.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, Kurt's wonderful to work with, and it was great catching up with you finally this year in Acadia during one of our workshops there. We're in Vermont, New Hampshire, Acadia. Kurt and I have a trip to Monhegan Island, which is pretty special here on the coast of Maine. We'll be going to Utah in November, Olympic National Park in May. So we're all over the place. And we're pretty dynamic, awesome duo, Mr. Budliger and I.
And both of you are so good at modesty.
There's so much love between Kurt and I that I think it's going to rub off on all the participants, and it's just going to be, everyone's going to feel that, I think, when you're with us.
Fantastic. Well, I definitely recommend everyone check out Ben's work and consider one of his workshops. Ben, thank you so much for coming on to PhotoMasters. It's been a real pleasure.
That's been great, Ian. Thanks so much for having me, man.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.